What is vape or vaping? Vape device or electronic cigarette is in two parts: the cartridge, which holds the liquid, and a heating element, which heats that liquid. That liquid is heated to create a vapor that you inhale. Now, you may have noticed a slightly different inflection on the word vapor. That's because it's not what's really being inhaled. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Right now, let's talk about the liquid inside the vape cartridge. That can contain almost anything. The Food and Drug Administration, which is our government agency that regulates all of our food, drugs like our prescription and non-prescription drugs, also regulates vaping devices, but they do not have the ability right now to regulate the liquid inside the device. So those can contain almost anything. We do know some of the stuff that sometimes it contains, and it's generally some really unhealthy stuff. Things like nicotine, which is almost always in there. Things like heavy metals such as nickel, lead, or cadmium, and ultrafine particles. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in just a minute. What is tobacco? Tobacco comes in three main forms: cigarettes, cigars, and smokeless. Before we get into more information about tobacco, I do want to say that when I talk about tobacco in this presentation, I'm talking about tobacco grown commercially, grown specifically for making a profit. I am not talking about tobacco that is grown for use in ceremonial or religious purposes. I am talking about tobacco grown in large quantities, and the things that they do to that tobacco really changes the structure and the contents of that tobacco. So tobacco comes from a plant. So plants that are grown can be affected by the things that are used to help them grow, things that are in the soil, things like herbicides or pesticides used to increase the yield so that the profit from growing the plant is also increased. So when things are added to the soil or to the plant, it changes that plant. It can contain up to 7,000 substances like cadmium, lead, nickel, or arsenic, which is a poison. We also know that tobacco can cause cancer. And lastly, secondhand smoke from tobacco smoking is dangerous. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in just a minute. Your first quiz. Vaping is healthier than smoking cigarettes for people your age, young people under age 21. True or false? The answer is false. It is not healthier for young people to vape than to smoke because what you inhale is not water vapor, and it is not safer than smoking a cigarette. What it is actually an aerosol. So when that vape liquid is superheated in the device, that liquid becomes a microfine particles, and that's what an aerosol is. Other things that you should know about vape: the nicotine content in a vape cartridge can be much higher than that of even cigarettes. So generally when people who smoke, they smoke one cigarette at a time. But in a vape device, depending on the concentration of nicotine in that liquid, it can be up to 20 times stronger of a concentration of nicotine than in cigarettes. So just imagine for a moment somebody who's trying to smoke 20 cigarettes at one time. That's how much nicotine somebody who is vaping can be inhaling at once. Also in vape, there are up to 30 plus other cancer-causing chemicals, and secondhand vape is dangerous just like secondhand smoke. We're going to learn more about that in just a minute. So I've mentioned nicotine a couple of times already in this presentation, that vaping and tobacco both contain nicotine. But what exactly is nicotine? Well, nicotine is a chemical and it is addictive. Some of the things that nicotine does in your body, it increases your blood pressure and your heart rate. So have you ever had somebody who smokes or vapes say to you, "Oh, I am so stressed. I really need to smoke or hit my vape so that I can calm down"? Well, guess what? They're not actually calming down when they are smoking or vaping because nicotine is a stimulant. It does not slow things down in your body. It actually increases them. So it increases your blood pressure. It increases your heart rate. Exactly the opposite of what we want to have happen when we want to calm down. We want our blood pressure to slow down, our heart rate to slow down. But that doesn't happen when we're taking nicotine into our body. Other things that nicotine does, it can cause lightheadedness, headaches, dizziness, abnormal dreams, also nausea, dry mouth, heartburn, and ulcers. And especially important for young people, nicotine can disrupt the learning process. It can actually make it harder for you to learn new things and to retain that information long term. And lastly, certainly not least, we all know that nicotine and smoking can contribute to cancer. Same thing when you take nicotine in when vaping. Now we're going to watch a little video, give you a break from my voice and give my voice a break. He's going to mention at the beginning of the video every time you take a puff of a cigarette, but just know that anytime you take nicotine into your body, this is what's going on, whether it's from a cigarette or not.
Ever wondered what's going on in your brain when you puff a cigarette? This is a tale of two chemicals, the nice and the not so nice, and what happens when they meet. Nicotine is fast and it's sneaky. Like an Olympic sprinter, it races into the lungs. From the lungs, it enters the blood and reaches the brain within seconds of that first puff. The brain is made up of many cells called neurons. Nicotine actually affects pathways in the brain called the reward pathway. The reward pathway is a normal and important part to our survival. It's the area of the brain which makes us feel good every time we eat or do something we enjoy. Once nicotine arrives at this area of the brain, nicotine attaches itself to the receptor on neurons, like a lock fitting in a key, and this wakes up the reward pathway of the brain. This is where dopamine comes in, the nice chemical. When the reward pathway is activated, dopamine gets released and we feel warm and fuzzy and satisfied. However, too much repetitive stimulation of the reward system can be dangerous, especially with nicotine. Nicotine hijacks the reward pathway, attaching to a nicotine receptor to release dopamine and convincing the brain that we need another cigarette. Every time we smoke, we get that feeling of reward, and so we do it more. This sets up an unhealthy pattern as nicotine tricks the brain into activating those warm and fuzzy feelings with every puff. This causes changes in the brain over time. The longer you smoke, the more and more receptors are created, and each one is craving its nicotine fix. Over time, the body learns that it needs nicotine to feel good, but it can never get enough. That's why it's so hard to quit. The longer we smoke, the stronger the cravings for nicotine become. With no nicotine to bind into nicotine receptors, the reward pathway is not stimulated anymore. This means there is less dopamine. With less dopamine, people get withdrawal symptoms. The good news is that these changes in the brain start returning to normal the longer you go without a cigarette. Getting past the first stage of withdrawal when you quit can be hard, with lots of empty nicotine receptors screaming out for their fix. But the good news is that over time there are fewer and fewer nicotine receptors as your brain goes back to the way it was before you smoked.
All right, at the beginning, he talked about different ways to stimulate the reward pathway. He mentioned eating, and then he drew about music. Those are great ways to stimulate the reward pathway, but there are others. Anytime you're doing something that you really enjoy, like he said, music or eating food that you like, or playing video games, hanging out with your friends, playing sports, drawing, any kind of art, all of those are much better ways to stimulate the reward pathway and get that little hit of dopamine than taking nicotine into your body. As a matter of fact, it's so effective that people who are trying to quit nicotine, it's actually recommended that they either increase a hobby like that, something that they enjoy, or to take up a new one in order to stimulate that reward pathway and get that dopamine in a different way other than taking nicotine into their bodies. So we've talked a lot about nicotine and about nicotine addiction, how your body feels like it needs it, right? So in the video, we talked about how it stimulates that reward pathway in your brain. But sometimes we have an unrealistic expectation of what addiction means. I call it kind of the Hollywood version of addiction. So we see addiction in movies and TV shows, people who may drink too much or they may do hard drugs. And we think about addiction being that big thing where somebody may lose their job or they may experience homelessness or lose their families because of addiction. But not all addiction looks like that Hollywood version. Sometimes addiction, especially with nicotine addiction, can look something like this. Needing to vape or smoke immediately after you wake up. If you feel anxious or irritable due to cravings because you haven't done it in a while. Vaping or smoking without thinking about it. Like if you're hanging out with your friends and all you're really doing is vaping, then that might be nicotine addiction. If you're having trouble concentrating or sleeping because maybe you've vaped too much during that day, that might be nicotine addiction. And if you're thinking about it when you should be doing other things, like you think about getting to the bathroom or to the end of the field at lunch just so you can vape, that might be nicotine addiction. And even after you've learned that it's not good for you, that it carries many health risks, you continue to vape or smoke, then that's probably nicotine addiction. So at the beginning, I mentioned secondhand smoke and secondhand vape. So now we're going to learn a little bit more about those. So secondhand smoke is anything that is exhaled by somebody who's actively smoking or anything that comes off of the end of a burning cigarette. And secondhand vape is anything that's exhaled by somebody who's actively vaping. So what's so dangerous about secondhand smoke and secondhand vape? Well, first of all, secondhand smoke, the stuff coming off of the end of the cigarette is not filtered at all. When somebody is actively smoking, they are inhaling that smoke through a filter. So even though the person who's smoking is inhaling it into their lungs, they are getting less of the toxic stuff from that smoke than the people who are sitting around the person who's smoking, because that smoke coming off of the end of the cigarette has not been filtered in any way. And then for somebody who is vaping, the vape is gone pretty quickly, right? Wrong. So most people think that because you can't see it or smell it after a few seconds, unlike with cigarette smoke, that vape is just gone. That aerosol that people are inhaling and exhaling doesn't hang around for very long. But like oxygen, which is around us all the time, even though we can't see it, that vape aerosol that is exhaled hangs around for a long time. So anybody who's in the same room with somebody who's vaping is also vaping. So now we've talked about secondhand smoke. Let's talk about thirdhand smoke. First of all, almost everybody has experienced third-hand smoke, even if you've never heard the term. So I want you to imagine you've just walked into somebody's house. You've never been there before, but you instantly know someone in that house smokes. Tell me how. Yeah, of course. It's the smell. We've all smelled it. That lingering, dirty ashtray smell that is third-hand smoke. Even if somebody's not actively smoking at the time, we all know somebody in that house smokes. Well, that is third-hand smoke. It's the residue left from smoking, and it remains in anything absorbent, so hair, clothes, furniture, carpet, even paint. Have you ever been in a house and you move a picture and the wall underneath is a lighter color? That's because all of the paint around that picture has absorbed the smoke residue. Sometimes it's really hard to get rid of it. It can take years and years, and you can paint over it and it still doesn't go away. That's third hand. So why are we concerned about it? Is it just about the smell? No. All of that third-hand smoke that lingers and is absorbed into those surfaces over time continues to be released back into the air in a process called off-gassing. And now they've been studying the effects of third-hand smoke for quite a while. And while it's not as dangerous as active smoking or being around somebody who's an active smoker, it does carry all of the same risks of health issues and cancer that active smoking does, just at a lower amount. Now, what about third-hand vape? Well, guess what? Recent research shows that it is also showing the same kinds of patterns as third-hand smoke. Just because we can't see it and we can't smell it doesn't mean it's not there. So it also can contribute to all of those same health risks that we talked about for vaping. So we've talked a lot today about smoking and vaping. Now I want to take just a minute to look at them side by side. So first of all, I want to ask you, would you ever consider smoking? For most people your age, the answer is no. We know from decades of research, decades of advertising to you that smoking is dangerous. It's harmful. It causes cancer. And most of you are never going to smoke. So I want to do a little comparison. Smoking and vaping. So smoking, you inhale smoke into your lungs. Vaping, you inhale an aerosol into your lungs. While the substance might be a little different, it is almost the same because anytime we inhale something that isn't oxygen into our lungs, we are potentially doing damage. Smoking contains nicotine, which can be addictive, have some long-term learning issues for the developing brain. Vaping contains nicotine, can be addictive, and can have some long-term learning issues for the developing brain. Are those the same or different? Smoke inhaled contains heavy metals and other substances known to cause cancer. The aerosol you inhale when vaping contains heavy metals and other substances known to cause cancer. Same or different? Secondhand smoke, dangerous to those who are not smoking. Secondhand vape, dangerous to those who are not vaping. Same or different? When you really look at them, smoking and vaping are not really all that different after all. So I just want to leave you with one last question. If you would never consider smoking because you know it's dangerous, why would you ever consider vaping? All right, your last little quiz. Most people your age, young people under the age of 21, vape or use tobacco. True or false? It is false. It may seem like most people your age are doing it, but it's really not true. So this data that comes from the Youth Risk and Resiliency Survey from San Juan County. This isn't anywhere else in New Mexico or anywhere else in the country. These are middle school students right here in our county that answered these questions in 2021. And the questions were, have you used a vape or e-cigarette device in the last 30 days? Or have you smoked a cigarette in the last 30 days? And only 9.2% said they had used an e-cigarette or vape device, and only 3.1% said they had smoked cigarettes. That is a very small number. If you think about most being 50%, it is not anywhere close to being most. The problem is, you know who's doing it. You see those individuals, and it feels like a lot of people, but it really isn't. Most people your age are making the right decision. They are choosing not to smoke or use an e-cigarette or vape device. So, if you have been sucked in by the flavors and you thought you were just getting flavor, but you ended up getting nicotine as well, and you would like to stop vaping, there's help out there. First of all, you can always go to a trusted adult, your school nurse or a trusted adult in your life, like your parents or an uncle or aunt, and just tell them, hey, I think I might be addicted to nicotine. I started vaping because the flavors were cool and my friends were sharing them, but now I don't think I can stop by myself. There's help. If you don't feel like that is something that you can do, you don't have somebody you feel like you can go to without getting in trouble, there is anonymous help out there. You can text Ditch Vape to 887-09, and the Truth Initiative will text you resources that will help you quit the nicotine.